Mr. Crowley, what went on in your head? Oh, Mr. Crowley, did you talk to the dead? Approaching a time that is magic, you know you're waiting on door. You love the people with magic, you know you're waiting on Satan's door. Mr. Charming, let the sorrow not go. Oh, Mr. Alarming, now eternal repo. Approaching a time that is magic, you know you're waiting on war. Who love the people with magic, you know you're waiting on Satan's door. Alright guys, so today I thought I was going to talk about Randy Rhoads, continuing on the series. Got something in my eye here, hang on. Continuing on the series, I think I did the first video, this will be the second video. So I'm going through Marshall DSL-1, and then a Marshall Cab 112, and then Flying V, Jackson JS32, and then I'm just going through the Distortion Plus, which is what Randy Rhoads used. His setting, which is popularly known, which is basically you have to take the input all the way to 10 and then keep the distortion at a noon. So again, drive it, the level should be floored, should be basically dimed, right? And then keep the the distortion at 12. And then I just have a noise gate on here. So anyway, I guess we can talk about two things here, which is, classical influence, and then also, the alternate picking, both of which Randy Rhoads was, he was basically trying to get everybody to understand that those two things are very important. So neoclassical playing, I think this is kind of a genre that basically, it's a genre that I think came about around the 70s. Probably the first person to do it, I think, would be maybe Ritchie Blackmore, because of his sort of his, medieval kind of Renaissance kind of, affiliation where, like the first, Rainbow album, which is sometimes they call it castle rock, right? Because, it's all about with Dio, it's all about, songs like that, about, castles and kings and things like that, which is really cool. So based on that theme, he started exploring more different scales, beyond just now. Randy Rhoads uses a lot of pentatonics, but like I said, he also uses other scales, more exotic scales. So Blackmore was the first one to sort of do similar things like that, to where he also used the pentatonic, because pentatonic is good for soloing because it only has 5 notes. It fits in well with a lot of chord progressions, right? And then he also used, exotic scales. So I would say he's the kind of the first person. And then I can't point him out, all out, because there's probably a whole lot. And then, other players like Yngwie, who's basically influenced severely by, Blackmore, right? And then so I would say Blackmore sort of started it off in the 70s with that kind of, Dio himself said the band that they wanted to start after Elf, which was the band Dio came from, was basically, they wanted to mix rock and roll with classical music, right? So that's kind of where this comes from. And then it kind of took on a neoclassical approach, neoclassical guitar players, and I'm sure there's a whole bunch of them, but Randy Rhoads was one of the most impressive, I think. Because, I don't really like technical guitar playing much, the Sunset Strip scene. And I've mentioned before in the first video that Randy Rhoads is the only exception, because he makes it sound like it has meaning. You know what I mean? Much like what I played. You know what I mean? Much like, the arrangements, the classical arrangements, the beginning part that I played, right? So that is very reminiscent of like Bach. So if you look at metal musicians and you ask them, what is your favorite composer? A lot of them will say Bach. Dio will say Bach. Jeff Hanneman will say Bach. All these are, great musicians, great melody writers. So if Dio says Bach is his favorite, I would pay attention. So, and that's where this comes from. That first piece that I played. Right? That part right there, that's all Bach. So I actually added the last piece. How cool is that? So that last bit was my improvisation. So this is Bach. Oops. Bach stops right there, and of course the piece goes on. I didn't know what to do, so I just made up my own stuff. So I went like this. All that is mine. Then I went into Crowley, right? Isn't that cool? It's a Bach Karthik composition. So actually classical music is, composing classical music is something that I'm getting into because I'm a filmmaker. So I'm going to I've already done it. So put that in, one of my films, pieces that I compose. So nowadays, you don't have to have like a 20-piece orchestra and all that. There's software where if you can think it, the software we can just, and it sounds pretty good, right? It sounds pretty good. So it'll just basically transcribe it for you, or you can just put in the notes themselves. So I'm getting into that to where I just want to be like a full, blown kind of, composer, right? In the, style of like Baroque music, Renaissance music, and things like that. I used to have a friend in college who was into like extreme music like I was when I was, right at that time. And then, he was into like, a lot of like, death metal, black metal and stuff like that. At one point, he just turned around and said, man, I just want to like, and he turned around into like what I'm doing now, into like classical music. And then he just said, I want to just be able to compose, right? Compose everything. And then once you hear Bach, it's like, wow, that is like the ultimate, right? It surpasses everything else. It surpasses metal. It surpasses everything. And, so that is something that I want to sort of get into. I would love to be like a full-blown classical composer and then just put out my pieces. So right now what I'm doing is taking those pieces, putting it in my film because I'm a filmmaker. But, like I said before, this is why we're still holding on to people from 500 years ago, because newer composers, right, aren't going to have the same impact as like, those early composers, or even newer scientists won't have the impact of like Einstein. Newer rock stars won't have the impact. So you see the pattern here. So that's a different topic, but worth mentioning, I think, at this point is that it's not that there's no new composers around, but it's just that, their impact isn't much, because your impact is only determined when it matters, right? This is why we're not seeing any rock stars. So anyway, Randy Rhoads is very influenced by that. So the pattern that I played here, this is in D, right? So you can tell that when I went into his solo, after I sang, I'm a singer actually, so I'm sure if you're on this channel, you probably checked out all my, because I sing in a Sabbath band, so go check that out. I'm a standalone singer, but I also play a little bit of everything. I typically don't like playing guitar. I don't, really consider myself a guitar player, even though I played lead guitar in bands and stuff. So I kind of graduated from each phase. I kind of started out as a bass player, which is the biggest mistake I think I ever made in my life, because I wasted a few years from when I was like 17 just playing bass, because I wanted to get my ideas across, and bass is not the instrument for that. Then I went into guitar, then lead guitar, then some drums, and then eventually now I just standalone singing. That's it. That's my favorite thing to do. So this is just like, but I do like this stuff though. So my point here was that after I sang, I went into the solo, and I pretty much hit those same notes from the, the Bach piece, right? These exact notes. Oops, where am I? I think that's a very fitting ending. What do you think? So, the Randy Rhoads solo is based on that same scale. So that's why I went, you know. And then I was just able to improvise on that. And then some of these runs are the same notes. Right? That's exactly from a solo, right? So basically what it is a harmonic minor scale. So if you've been following this channel, I cover, you know, some exotic scales and stuff like that. So I did a bit on the harmonic minor already, and then you can go check that out. So harmonic minor is basically, you know, it's actually like an Indian scale that, you know, we talked about how, like a lot of these scales, musical ideas came from, you know, originated from India, you know, 5,000 years ago. And then it probably, I wasn't there 5,000 years ago, but it probably, my guess would be, there was a lot of trading going on. You know, that's how the old world, you know, worked, is that you had shared ideas. So philosophy is shared. So Greek philosophy, for example, it's the collection of philosophy from around the world at that time. Right? If you're a philosopher, you can check this out. You can look this up. If you studied philosophy in college, you know this. The whole quest of a philosopher is to gain knowledge. So they would say, go to far places. Go to, you know, places like India. Go to places like Persia. Go to places like China. You know, get their knowledge and then bring it back. Right? So in this way, all of the ancient world is like this, not just Europe, but same thing was happening in India. You know, stuff that was happening in Europe was being, you know, they would bring back some ideas and that would become Indian. You know, maybe Chinese would, but Indian civilization is the oldest, right? But so anyway, this harmonic minor scale, it went up, you know, it went up to the Fertile Crescent through the Silk Road, right? Silk Road, very dangerous place. It's like a road that connects basically, you know, Asia all the way to Persia and then to Europe. Like, can you imagine like a road out of the middle of nowhere? There's nothing over there. There's desert, you know, and then it's probably just like, you know, carved through mud, right? Or sand, right? And then, you know, you could probably be robbed or killed. So the Silk Road was a dangerous road. So this information, that's how information traveled. So it went up to Persia and then it went up to probably Europe. Because these scales have existed. My point here is these scales have existed for a lot longer than most people know, right? And if you look at the harmonic minor scale, there's pain here. All this stuff I covered in another video, right? There's pain here. And I made the comparison that this is like, it sounds like you're just in, you know, you're headed up to Mount Sinai, onward to Golgotha, and then, you know, Jesus is going there with his cross, and he's just like this, and, you know, it's pain from the old world, you know, Jerusalem, you know, all that stuff, right? So this is not a happy scale. So that's why these exotic scales, people use them, and then evidently even, you know, Bach used them. So that piece right there is in harmonic minor, D harmonic minor. This right here, I'll play it again. This part's mine. How many times have I said that already? I don't want you to forget it. I can totally compose like this. So it was good that it's in D, because then, you know, Mr. Crowley is in D. So anyway, that's the history of it. So that's all the history of it. So neoclassical guitar, which I think my favorite is Randy Rhoads, the person who, you know, although Blackmore started it, but I think Ritchie Blackmore is sort of in a different way, right? He's more like, you know, he did a lot of like modal stuff, right? Everybody does the pentatonic, but he did a lot of modal stuff. I'm not saying that's, you know, anything he played, but I'm just saying, you know, modal music sounds like that, right? So, and I think, you know, it was taken in different directions by guitar players in the 80s, right? Blackmore is more like 70s, right? Blackmore, you know, kind of, he was the pioneer in the 70s. then, you know, Randy Rhoads, he kind of took it to a kind of the next level, to where you can hear the stuff on like Crazy Train. The way that you think, you know, the way that I think that he's influenced by classical music, it's just the way that like his solo is constructed, right? This is why Randy Rhoads stands out over, you know, like Yngwie, which is just, you know, it's just, hate to say it, not a hater, but, you know, it just kind of all sounds the same, because it's just like, you know, he's just ripping through and everything, and then it all kind of sounds the same. It's just like, it's almost like those fast players, everybody except Randy, it's just, they're almost like just practicing scales up and down. This is what Lemmy said. He just said, oh, they're just practicing scales up and down, putting them on the record and calling it a solo. So it'll be like, you know, they're just, you know, they're just practicing it up and down. That's it. Randy Rhoads knows how to make music, much like Bach, right? The pieces that I played. So Randy Rhoads solos sound like that. And I showed you that it's the same notes even. So the solo to Mr. Crowley, most likely the song's in D. So this has got to be in, you know, D harmonic minor. So the solo there. So the way you get fluent at it. Now, I found some exercises from Randy Rhoads online and stuff like that. So I'll share that with you as the series continues. But the main key here is alternate picking. Now, alternate picking almost never gets any love, because people are always, especially in like thrash metal, extreme metal, right? People are always like, right? But there's only so fast you can go. So you have to alternate pick at some point if you want to play intricate stuff. So, right, that's all alternate picked. You couldn't downpick that. It would sound choppy. This is downpicked. Right? It sounds kind of weird. You can't go as fast. See how fast I can go? So anyway, alternate picking is important, and Randy Rhoads discussed this as one of his students, and he stressed that alternate picking, and then he gave them exercises, is very important. So one of the things he would do is this, do like, you know, 3-note, you know, runs. So these are called like runs. I'll cover this in a different video. Not that I'm like an expert or anything like that. If I find something that's cool, I'm just sharing it with you, that's all. Because I just love, you know, talking about music, that's all. I'm not even a guitar player. I'm a singer. That's what I love to do. I would never, I hope I never have to play guitar and sing in a band again. That's my hope. You know, even because I write original music, I don't want to do that. I'd rather just give that to a guitar player and go, here, play it. And then, you know, I would love to find a Randy Rhoads type player, you know, with all that, you know, energy, with all that flair and with all that, so that I could just go solo, you know, like solo Ozzy, solo Karthik. Right? And then we could write songs together. But where would you find a player like that? I don't know. Anyway, he would have like these 3-note runs like this. And none of these things, like I said, I can't play him like, obviously I can't play him like Randy. I'm not like a Randy clone, nor am I an Ozzy clone. So I just like to, because, you know, it's fun to do it, that's all. And the easiest thing to do is do like a cover band. So, you know, that's why I do it. So that you can kind of get, you know, hone in your craft better, right? But anyway, this is how, you know, you do the 3-note runs, is that what he would do is just take the pentatonic, so just take the pentatonic and just do, think about it as 3 notes, 3 notes, 3 notes. So it'd be like, then you go to the next note, then you go to the next note. That's one of his exercises. So probably in another video, what I'll do is I'll just like post that exercise and be like, this is the thing. And the key thing here, I guess this is like an introduction to the alternate picking, right? Is that you have to alternate pick, because that's this whole thing, is that, like you hear, that sounds very Randy Rhoads, right? It's his exercise. I can't even do it. So he would have his students do exercises like that, so that it gives you more of a kind of a legato feel, right? Legato has 2 meanings. Legato means fluid, right? To make fluid movements. Also, legato can mean like, you know, just not hitting the note at all, just doing pull-offs and then doing that. Some people interpret it as that. I interpret it as a fluid movement, right? That's the, So 2 different definitions there. These exercises you can just move. And then as you do them, right, what'll happen is that each note, this is what Steve Vai said about Ritchie Blackmore, was that the way Ritchie Blackmore plays is that each note almost had like its own zip code, right? Because each note had that weight and definition. How you get that is alternate picking. So that way it'll be like this. So I did that exercise for like, a couple of minutes. And then I found out any time I alternate picked, each note was stronger. So that is something that we want to do. So the takeaway in this is that I just started with kind of a neoclassical kind of approach, right? And we talked about neoclassical, influences. We talked about the key players there. And then we talked about how Randy Rhoads is influenced by it. And also his solo structure reminds you of classical music, right? Things like for Crazy Train, right? If I could do it. I got to establish the key first. Hang on. How does that go? Sorry. Right? Things like that, I think. Very legato feel, right? This one right here. There's no way you can do that without, alternate picking. Then there's that big run. We'll talk about runs later. Oh, I should have ended on that note. First time I ended on the, basically a whole step below. Sorry. So it should have been like this. So that's the thing. So that will alternate picking will allow you to do all this stuff. So without alternate picking, you really can't do anything. Down picking just sort of comes natural. As Kerry King said, anything above an eighth note should basically be alternate picked, right? So you should only down pick stuff that is below an eighth note. There's only so fast you can go. That's the fastest I can go, but then I can't do intricate stuff with it. So ultimately, you got to just be like. Right? And then having these alternate picking exercises, in the back of your mind and doing them will strengthen each note, and then you'll have a more legato playing. So anyway, that was one of his exercises. Again, it's a 3-note kind of exercise that goes. It's just all just pentatonic. So it's the box pattern in A. It's these notes. And then when you hit each note, right, hit it with strength. So that a lot of times, as a singer, standalone singer, when I run into guitar players that I've played over the years, not anybody particular, I played with hundreds of musicians. I played with people in the Bay Area that were that had a lot of experience. And then what will happen is that, they've played shows, but they're afraid to pick the note. And they'll barely pick it. So if you barely pick it, it's going to sound weak. They'll literally play like that. You can't play like that. Like this alternate note, picking exercise will help you strengthen the picking. You can just take 3 notes and be like. By itself, right, the minor pentatonic, has a very sort of Chinese kind of feel. You know what I mean? Doesn't this sound totally Chinese? I'm waiting for that gong to go. Wow, reminds me of like 70s, shows. So you pick, notes from. I'm just being funny. Sorry, bad joke. But I have to be careful here. So anyway, alternate picking. If you want to play, in that style, alternate picking. By no means am I an expert or, anything else like that. Or like I said, I don't even consider myself a guitar player. I actually hate playing guitar. But this kind of playing with Randy Rhoads is kind of cool. I like to just sit here and just pick it up and be like, oh, what did he do here? What did he do there? That's kind of cool. So anyway, very, like I said, influential kind of neoclassical player. I don't think there were too many players after him that had that kind of impact, right? That had that kind of impact to where, any neoclassical players after that, I'm not sure, Like I said, Yngwie, but he's sort of his own thing, where, he's doing his own thing. So which is kind of nothing like this.